Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, HPD Verification, the new standard of material transparency. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send that out to you in the next day or so. And you will also have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel that's located in the upper right corner of your screen. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Nicole Muniz, Managing Director of SES Global Services Environmental Certification Services Division, John Geyer, Program Director at HPDC, and Patrick Boyle, Director of Corporate Sustainability at Sloan. So, Nicole?
Thank you, Janelle. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be today. I just wanted to, again, thank you for attending today's webinar on HPD verification, the new standard for material transparency. So for today, we hope to provide you a broad overview of the basics of an HPD, insight on the HPD Verification Pilot program, benefits of third-party verification from a manufacturer's perspective, and then an overall review of the verification process. Next slide. So an HPD, in its most basic definition, is a declaration of a material or product-associated health hazard based on HPD's Open Standard version 2.1, its most updated version as of now. It provides an opportunity for self-declaration, self-published HPDs. It discloses thresholds of limits of 100 parts per million or 1,000 parts per million. The HPD standard was developed with the intent to provide specifiers, designers, greater transparency, and reporting standardization for health-based product information. The adoption of this idea has gained immense traction since its first introduction in 2012 by such building standards as LEED, Well Building, ILFI's Living Building Challenge, Living Product Challenge, Google's Portico, and Healthier Hospital. Now, with the most updated version of the HPD standard version 2.1, we have a greater opportunity to strengthen the reliability and the accuracy of the HPD through third-party verification. And so with that, I would like to introduce John Geyer of the Health Product Declaration Collaborative to review the third-party verification pilot program.
Thank you, Nicole. We can go to the next slide. And basically, our history goes back to 2009, 2010, when the Materials Research Collaborative and the other folks working on the beginnings of transparency and product optimization for the building industry realized that they had a bit of a stumbling block in their work because there wasn't a consistent way to talk about the materials and health issues related to those materials in building products. So the idea started getting kicked around that we needed something like an HPD in the 2010 timeframe. It was piloted in 2012, and then from that work, the HPD collaborative ended up being incorporated in 2012, and at Greenville 2012, we released the first release of the open standard for health product declarations. That standard has continued to evolve. We had a major update in 2015, a smaller update this year, and we're already planning 2.2 for next year. So it's a evolving document as we learn how to use the information that's included in an HPD. We're finding ways to refine the standard as well as improve the quality of the HPDs. And Nicole mentioned earlier that we're starting to get a lot of traction. The slide says we have 2,600 plus. That's now actually, we're over 3,100 now as of this morning. I think we had 3,176 HPDs that have been published so far. So next slide. Now, because HPDs are the voluntary self-disclosure of highly complex and detailed technical documents, there's lots of room for mistakes in content and the interpretation of the standard. So almost from the beginning, we started being asked for some way to provide independent review and verification of completed HPDs, to add a little more quality assurance or confidence that the HPDs fully comply with the standard, include the data that's required, and that data is source verified, which basically means that the data that's in the HPD matches the manufacturer's records for their manufacturing. So bills of material and those kinds of documents. The verification does not include shop floor review. It's what I would call a desktop audit as opposed to a shop floor. So what the verification is assuring is that the documentation in the HPD matches the documentation that the manufacturer uses, but doesn't actually go out and test the materials or any of that. So, and again, the idea of the verification is to provide an extra measure of confidence that the reported information is credible. Next slide. And in order to do that, in order to provide that extra level of assurance, we need to have a program that is consistent and evenly applied across all the HPDs. And so the first part of that is the requirements for the verifiers. We have built the requirements and the approval process around ISO 17065, which is the ISO standard that applies to this type of work. And we require that the verifiers not be certified to the standard necessarily, but their operational practices do conform to the appropriate sections of the ISO standard. And so we also use that in our approval process. So our application for verifiers is basically modeled on the ISO audit model, where we list all of the requirements that the applier must meet and ask them to make a statement as to how they meet that standard, and then provide any background documentation that will support that. And then we go through that carefully and review with them. Next slide. So the program objectives, I'm sorry, I see what happened. I've stumbled a little bit. I think we skipped a slide, in that before we talked about the requirements, I had wanted to talk about the objectives of the program. So could we go back to that slide? Are we moving back? I think we need to go back a couple of slides. There we go. Thank you. So this is actually where I wanted to start when we talked about the fact that because the HPDs are complex and detailed documents, we need an extra level of confidence in the information. And to do that, we need to have a standard methodology for verification, as well as the rigorous requirements and approval process for the verifiers. So that was the main thing I wanted to take from this slide. So now, can we go back to the objectives for the pilot? Okay, so we've just completed our pilot program. And and our objectives for that pilot were basically to work through the whole process, the approval process, as well as the verification process itself. We have, as part of our program, we have a review process whereby the first 3 verifications that are done by a verifier are reviewed and approved, and then on an ongoing annual basis, we also review a sampling of verifications. So we needed to test that process. And then we were also defining training requirements and basically understanding what the effort and timeline was going to be for executing the verifications. And so what we basically did is walk through the whole process from identifying the pilot verifiers, going through the approval process, matching them up with manufacturers, and then have them actually determine which HPDs will be verified and do that verification. Next slide. So it was executed. Oops. It was executed with 4 pilot verifiers, working with 8 manufacturers. Now, we are saying that the pilot is complete. We don't have all 15 verifications in hand right now. We've had a problem with with the manufacturers being able to get all the required information for several of them, but we do have 12 of them done, and they do go across the spectrum of product types, so that we think we have a good sampling of all the products that will be verified in the future. And the pilot program was quite successful. We did confirm the application and approval process, and as we were working through the checklist and our verification process, we found several things that we were able to improve as we have in the other one. So rather than reading all of it's basically we've been able to improve the process across the board because of the results of our pilot. Next slide. And so we announced yesterday the introduction of the program. We'll be announcing it further at Green Build, and we have additional information available on the website. What we'll be rolling out at Green Build is the outlines of the program. We're still finishing up some of the details. For instance, the pilot verifiers are in the process of being approved as fully as verified approvers. That will actually happen in the first half of November. That we'll be able to get those in place, and with a couple of them we still have to wait for their final HPDs to come in, but that process will be ongoing in November. And as this stuff is completed, the information on the website will be updated. So with the next slide, I can hand it over to Patrick.
That's great. Thanks, John. Today I'm going to be speaking about the benefits of the HPD process from a manufacturer's perspective. But before I dive into that, I want to give you a brief introduction to Sloan. So next slide, please. So Sloan was founded in 1906 by that happy guy on the left-hand side there, Mr. William Elvis Sloan. It was founded in Chicago about 111 years ago, and it's owned by the same family today. Our products are considered the standard in the commercial plumbing space for water savings and quality. And you'll find Sloan products in buildings in North America and throughout the world. Next slide, please. Most people don't usually recognize the name Sloan right away, but I'm going to guarantee that just about everyone on this webinar at some point in time has used our product at some time. So we are a B2B business that produces commercial restroom fixtures and fittings, not residential. So you won't find our products in a Home Depot or a Lowe's or any big box store like that. So we manufacture flush valves, water closets, urinals, faucets, soap dispensers, hand dryers, and sink systems, just to name a few of our product lines. Next slide, please. Now, while you won't find Sloan in your own home, you will find our products in some of the biggest buildings in North America and across the globe. And just about each different marketplace. So when you think about education, healthcare, hospitality, offices, government buildings, to some of the oldest stadiums like Wrigley Field, to some of the new modern day stadiums that you're seeing pop up across North America and the globe today. Next slide. The Royal Flushometer was invented as an alternative to that large tank-type toilets that were hung on the wall directly above the toilet. So the user would pull that chain, and anywhere between 10 to 12 gallons of water would flow from that large tank to flush out that toilet. Back then in 1906, the Royal Flushometer used approximately 6 gallons of water, so effectively reducing that water consumption in half. Now, the flush valve has evolved over the last 100-some-odd years. In the 80s, we introduced sensor technology to help improve health and hygiene. Dual flush appeared in the 2000s. As that evolution of water reduction continued. And even today, we've incorporated solar panels, turbines, and even water valves that are made just for reclaimed water use in buildings. Next slide. So flush volumes, they've declined quite a bit since 1906, from 10 to 12 gallons, and now we're using 1 gallon of water or even less in some cases. And I believe we're at that point where we need to consider the health and performance impacts of continued water reduction in that restroom. And now, while reduced water consumption is always a win, we shouldn't be sacrificing sanitation for conservation. So this is one of the main reasons that we started looking into product transparency reports. We need to find another way to push that envelope in our industry. And the ability to dive deep and see how the life cycle of a particular product impacts both the environment and human health, that was just the next obvious path for Sloan. So we utilized SCS Global for our EPDs and our HPDs. And we started on the product that actually started Sloan. It was our Royal Flushometer. We chose a cradle-to-grave cycle for our EPDs and the 100 part per million level for our HPDs. And the amount of detail we received from those reports was amazing. We had an idea of what the chemicals of concern would be within our various products, but the ability to look deeper, 100 parts per million deeper, has provided us with a greater insight on the impact of our products, the impact our products are having, and not only just on the end user, but on the Sloan employees who manufacture and assemble these products as well. So I'm beginning to have that conversation with our product research teams about chemical and various component alternatives. And that conversation so far have all been very positive, and just trying to find the alternatives to the chemicals and materials that we've identified in our HPDs. That's going to be the biggest impact for us, trying to find those components that won't negatively impact quality and price. But so far, great conversations, and we're going to have several changes going forward that's definitely going to impact our footprint on our next version of HPDs. So next slide. When we start talking about customer interest, another main decision maker for us was the fact that our customers were asking us for our health product declarations. I'm the one within our company that the sales reps reach out to complete the green building framework, document forms, and I'm seeing more and more requests for HPDs. When you look at today's green building frameworks, like LEED, WELL, the Living Building Challenge, they've all incorporated credits into their frameworks looking beyond just water conservation. And they're really starting to consider the most important factor in any building, and that's the human actually occupying it. I believe that these are probably the most important credits for any green building framework. Like I said, conserving natural resources is paramount, but finally taking into account the human elements of our health, especially when we spend a large portion of our day inside of an office building, it's a well-needed aspect of any high performance building. Next slide. So we started with our staple product and best-selling product at our Royal manual flushometer, and we had a really good experience with the HPD project for that product, and we're on the verge of actually releasing several more HPDs on a few more products. Sloan, we currently offer the widest breadth of product transparency reports, and I'm fairly certain that we're the only commercial plumbing manufacturer that offers our customers an HPD, and I'm definitely anticipating incorporating more products in 2018. So it only makes sense for us to keep expanding our HPD offering, especially as the green building frameworks continue to offer credits for these types of reports. So that's all I have on my end, and with that, I believe I'm passing it back over to Nicole.
Thank you, Patrick. That was great. So what I would like to talk about right now is just an overview of the HPD process. Next slide. So right now there are two pathways to get verified. So there's self-published HPD and then the verification, or independently professionally prepared HPDs and verification. Through these slides, I'm going to be reviewing the second. So with a prepared HPD from a professional and a verification by SDS. Next slide. So with the two phases, what we'd start with is applying for the HPD. So a customer would come to us to apply for an HPD. We review the scope through initial information, mostly in regards to MSDS information. Formulation information can be provided. In most cases, we will be signing an NDA to make sure that the confidentiality of the formulation is maintained. And with that, we provide a bundled service. And so that will be with our preparation services from Top Services and then SDS verification work. Once the scoping is completed, we start by kicking it off through the preparation phase. And so with that, we're providing the client information on becoming an HPD member or purchasing tokens. And so it really depends on the number of HPDs that you're seeking. And so with the purchase tokens from the HPDC, you'll have a limit of 5 HPDs. With the HPD membership, you will have an indefinite amount of HPDs that you can create in the HPD builder. Next, what we would do is, next slide, sorry. We will complete an initial table of the composition, so we're asking for full information and material breakdown of the product or material, and this is information that Top Services will gather and to support the preparation of the HPD. The benefits of having the HPD preparer is that in a lot of cases, supplier information and formulation is hard to gather. So with that, the preparer will prepare agreements directly with the supplier and the client. This provides an extra level of assurance that any formulation information is not passed on to the manufacturer. It is completely confidential between Top Services and the supplier. The reason that this is helpful is because, again, the HPD is a health hazard declaration. You do not have to provide full disclosure of all ingredients. There are options for that. And the intent always is for a health hazard declaration and not full necessarily all the ingredients. So that's helpful in terms of making sure that the confidentiality is maintained with the supplier and Top Services. So next, once that all that information is prepared by Talk Services, they will start creating the HPD in the builder. It's a client access. The client creates their portal, and Talk Services is able to go in there as a guest user and prepare the information. Once that's completed, Talk Services does send the information over to SCS with a full package. Next slide. And next slide, yes. And next slide. So the verification will start once the Talk Services provides MSDS, formulation, and the draft HPD to SCS. Next slide. And so what we do is making sure that the HPD is complete and ensuring that all the information meets the criteria is HPD version 2 or 2.1, whichever the version that we are verifying. Current reviews have been for HPD version 2.1, but the one that we see on is, as you'll notice, is for version 2.0. The formats are different slightly, but essentially it starts out with section 1 for summary, and we make sure that all the information is included in there, in particular the classification and product description at the top of the summary, on top of the summary section. Next slide. Section 2 is going over the material ingredients. We're verifying that the information is complete and matches up with the formulation information that is received. If there's any discrepancies, which can happen, we'll follow up with Talk Services, and then if needed, to supplier and the manufacturer for further information and clarification. These are identified and screened materials. So one option for here, as I was mentioning, if the supplier does not want to provide information on their proprietary ingredients, this would be an area where instead of, for example, UC poly or PVC, this would be undisclosed, but the hazards would be characterized. So this would keep and maintain the confidentiality of the ingredient. Next slide. Other areas of the HPD is section 3. This is where the certifications and compliance are included. So with our package that we receive from Talk Services, we're also verifying the certifications that might be associated. So with this particular example, there was a floor score certification, which we're able to verify through alternative green product guides to make sure that it is a valid certificate and all the information meets the criteria. Section 4 is the accessories. So again, we'll verify that the information is complete. Some of this might be due diligence in terms of verifying with the manufacturer and specifications, what types of accessories are associated with the product, and making sure that full disclosure on any health hazards associated with that or additional HPDs that are associated with the installation of the product are included in this section. And then section 5, general notes, and this section does not include that. Next. And the last one is the key in the manufacturing information, which is self-explanatory. Next slide. So once all of that is completed, right now during this initial pilot phase, we are offering certifications for the HPD, and the certification validity dates are based on the HPD that is finalized and published, and so it will always match up with that timeline. So, and then it's a 3-year period. The conformance language is also noted here. It'll match up with the information in the summary page of the HPD. So for Sloan, as Patrick mentioned, the disclosure level was at 100 parts per million, and the product was characterize and screen incompleteness with the HPD version 2. You'll notice at the top underneath the product category, which will also match with on the HPD page 1, is the HPD release date. And so this is what is key in terms of matching up the published HPD at this moment with the HPD that SDS verifies. And next slide, I'll show what I mean exactly. Next slide, or next. So right here, this is a blow-up of the first page. And you'll see that underneath, you'll have the screening date, the release date. So that release date is what we match up on the certificate as the final from the final published HPD. And the expiration date will match up with the expiration date on the certificate as well, prior to being able to go into the builder and note that it's third-party verified before the finalization of the HPD third-party pilot program. Next slide. So there are options for making sure that your HPD is publicly available, and the HPD offers the HPD public repository. Next. And SDS has the Screen Products Guide, which you can search also for the HPD. Next. As I was mentioning earlier, the HPD does contribute to green building credits, and here are a few. For LEED version 4, we have the material resources option 1 and 2 for green screen benchmark materials and well building, collaborative for health, high performance schools, and living product challenge, and as well as Portico. Okay. So some great features in terms that have helped the verifiers further ensure completeness of the HPD in the check, as there's also a LEED V4 pre-check. So this also helps to make sure that we're providing information that the HPD meets LEED version 4, either option 1 or 2 or both. Next slide. And that's what it looks like. So in this case, this test one had many blank spots that needed to be updated. If it was complete, it would note that it met the criteria. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. Enough?
Thank you, Nicole and John and Patrick, and apologies for some of the technical difficulties we had earlier. The recording will be available, as I mentioned earlier, and the PDF of the slides is available upon request, so you can have access to the information on all the slides that kind of jumped around. But we do have a few minutes for questions. And first question is, of the 3,100 HPDs, how many were verified prior to the launch of the verification program? If none or a small amount, would it be a recommendation that previously developed HPDs go through verification?
It was a very small amount. We basically 12 of those 3,100 were verified as part of the pilot program. So yes, we are recommending that manufacturers go back and apply the verification to existing HPDs as well.
Great, thank you, John. Next question, and probably for Nicole, any ballpark costs for third-party verification?
That would really depend on the number of HPDs. For verification, it will range. We're about 1,500 to 2,500 for verification. The preparation also ranges. In terms of the number of supplier reach out that Talk Services might need to go through and to create the NDAs, and then as well as ingredients to review for health hazards.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Next question is for John. Is the third-party verification a requirement or recommendation?
It's a recommendation. It's not required. It's a recommendation, and actually HPDC is making it available because so many other people have asked for it. So we think it's a great idea and we understand why people need it, but we're not requiring, we're trying to make it available so that people have this capability. But other certifying bodies or bodies that actually are certifying rather than just making information available are asking for certification or for verification in some cases. Portico, for instance, is asking for verified information. But HPDC does not require it.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. One more question for you. When will verifier be able to update the HPD as verified in the builder?
In the month of November. We're working on that now. The pilot, as I said, is complete. What we're rolling out at Greenbuild is the final implementation of the program, and so we still have some administrative work to fully approve the verifiers that were involved in the pilot. So they're moved from pilot verifiers to fully approved verifiers, and their ability to make the changes in Builder will happen during the month of November.
Great. A few more questions are still rolling in. Next one, we have 184 HPDs currently. The cost of verifying them would be astronomical. My question is, does each HPD have to be verified, or would verification of a category of products cover all of the products in the category?
I guess I can take that, or at least start it. So it really depends. Each of the HPDs, to have a grouping on a single HPD for multiple products, there can't be a greater variance of 10% material difference. So that's one thing to consider. So some folks will have individual HPDs per product line, despite there could be less than 10% difference of the ingredients. And with that case, we can easily group large product groupings together, and that would definitely decrease the cost of verification of over 100 HPDs. And we definitely can work through that, looking at the more finer details of that project.
I would add that one of the things that we often say with HPDs is when you get the devil's in the details, and when you try to work out specifics, it's very variable depending on the individual products and stuff. But I would second what Nicole has offered, in that what we've seen in the pilot is if you group like HPDs, because the HPDs are verified for each HPD, so you would need one for each product or each group of products that meets the standards for being included in one HPD. But if the difference between products is slightly more than the 10% that's required by the standard to be in the same HPD, it would still be similar enough that if it were done as a whole project, the cost of doing all of the products would be less, because the work that the verifier had to do could be leveraged across multiple HPDs, and therefore bringing down the per HPD or per product cost. I hope that's clear. And Nicole, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. It really has to do with how much overlap we can we can gain in terms of the information, and so that really brings down the cost. And in most cases, it will overlap greatly if it's all kind of the same industry and product group.
Great. John, this is another question for you. Do you know if there are any market forecasts for verified disclosures other than Portico?
I don't. I don't have any other names on the tip of my tongue. I know that we have been asked generally a great deal, but I don't have that any specific requirements that are going to be made to require verified HPDs.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. And we are a little bit over, but we have one last question before we close. Do you provide the certificate on verification, or do you require independent testing by a third party and verification?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
This might be for Nicole. Do you provide the certificate on verification, or do you require independent testing by a third party plus verification?
For the HPD itself, there is not a requirement for testing. There's compliance certificates that would require third-party certification and testing, but we are not testing the material ingredients or verifying them in that way for the HPD. The only additional cost besides the verification would be the preparation services if chosen.
Yes, I'd like to make clear that the HPD verification does not require any independent testing. That the HPD verification is to verify that the information meets the standards, and but as I said earlier, it's a desk audit. We're checking that the documentation is correct. The third-party testing is not required.
Okay, great, thank you. And we're about at 11:45, so we went over, so we will wrap up. If you have any additional questions about HPD verification, please feel free to reach out to Nicole or John or even Patrick. And again, I want to remind you that the recording will be sent out to you in the next day or so. And so I want to thank you all for attending, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.